I'll be honest with you. I didn't know anything about gardening when I first started. It all began with a simple thought that crossed my mind one summer day. What if I could grow my own food? I was standing in my backyard, staring at a patch of soil that was just sitting there, waiting for something to happen. So I went to the local nursery and picked up a single tomato plant, a few seeds, and some soil. I didn't overthink it. Honestly, I didn't even have a plan. I just wanted to try it and see what would happen. That first plant was an experiment. I planted it in a pot, right in the corner of the yard, and hoped for the best. At first, nothing happened. I watered it, I gave it sunlight. But I didn't see much change. I almost thought I'd made a mistake. But then, one morning I went outside and saw it. Tiny little green leaves sprouting from the soil. It was so small, but it felt like a huge victory. I remember that moment like it was yesterday. I was excited, proud, and curious all at once. Maybe I can do this. But it wasn't just about watching a plant grow. It became this process, this commitment. I kept an eye on it every day. I checked for pests, I made sure it had enough water, and I started to learn about what tomatoes actually needed to thrive. I was soaking up knowledge from every source I could find. Books, online forums, YouTube videos. It was like a crash course in plant care. I'll admit I had no clue what I was doing at the start. But I kept going. Weeks went by and I started noticing changes. The plant grew taller and little buds appeared where flowers would eventually bloom. And then, the flowers bloomed. That was the turning point. The whole backyard suddenly felt different. Instead of just seeing dirt and weeds, I started seeing life. Tomatoes were forming, little green orbs hanging off the branches. Sure, they were tiny at first, but they were there. It felt like I had discovered a whole new world, one that didn't need anything fancy or complicated, just some patience and a little care. As much as I wanted to believe that my little tomato plant would thrive without a hitch, reality hit me pretty quickly. The first challenge? Pests. I wasn't prepared for how many bugs seemed to find my plant as their new home. Ants, aphids, even tiny caterpillars. I didn't want to resort to chemical pesticides, so I started Googling natural pest control methods. Some solutions were simple, like using a mixture of water and soap. Others involved introducing natural predators like ladybugs. The first time I saw a ladybug crawl onto a leaf, I felt like I had found my secret weapon. Then came the weather. I had no idea how much weather could affect a plant's growth. There were hot days when I was worried my plant would dry out, and rainy days when I wondered if it would flood. I found myself obsessively checking the forecast. On days when the sun blazed too hot, I'd scramble to figure out ways to protect my plant. Shade cloth, positioning the pot in a cooler spot, or just moving it indoors when the heat was unbearable became part of my daily routine. As the days went by, I started noticing some yellowing leaves. This was a big concern. Yellow leaves were usually a sign of nutrient deficiencies. Was I overwatering? Underwatering? I had no clue. I immediately ran to the internet again, reading up on plant nutrition. I learned about the importance of fertilizing, how tomatoes need the right balance of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. I found a basic organic fertilizer and began applying it. Slowly, the yellow leaves started to fade, and the plant seemed to perk up. There was also the issue of spacing. As my plant grew bigger, it started to crowd. I had planted it in a small pot, not thinking about how it would need more room. So I had to learn about pruning, how to trim back leaves and branches to allow for better airflow and sunlight. Then, the hardest lesson of all, patience. Some tomatoes didn't ripen as expected. Some fell off the vine prematurely. I remember feeling disappointed, like I had failed somehow. But that's when I had to remind myself, growing something from scratch takes time. In the end, the real value wasn't in the perfect harvest. It was in everything I learned along the way. Each problem taught me something new. Slowly but surely, I was becoming a better gardener, even though I didn't have it all figured out. After months of tending to my tomato plant and watching it grow into something much bigger than I ever imagined, a thought started to form. What if I could sell these? At first, it seemed like a crazy idea. I mean, who was I? Just a person with a small backyard and one tomato plant. I had already been giving tomatoes to friends and neighbors, and the feedback was always positive. People would come by to pick up a few ripe tomatoes, and they'd rave about how fresh and flavorful they were. Every time someone took a bite, they'd tell me, "You should sell these." So I took a deep breath and decided to take the leap. The first step was simple. I needed more tomatoes. So I expanded. I added more pots, made a bigger garden bed, and started planting different varieties. The goal wasn't just to grow tomatoes, it was to grow enough to sell. Next, I had to figure out how to sell them. I realized I didn't need a fancy setup right away. I could start small, just a simple table out front of my house. I put up a sign that read, "Fresh tomatoes for sale," and set up my first little stand. I was nervous, not knowing how it would go. I mean, who would want to buy tomatoes from a random person with a small garden? But to my surprise, people started showing interest. It wasn't a huge rush at first, but the word spread. More and more neighbors came by to check out the tomatoes. Some even bought them. The next challenge was pricing. How much should I charge? I didn't want to price myself too high, but I also didn't want to undervalue the hard work. After some research, I settled on a price that felt right. Affordable enough to attract customers, but fair to cover my costs and make a little profit. Soon, it wasn't just neighbors who were stopping by. I had regulars who came every week, and even people from surrounding areas. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive. People loved the freshness, the quality, and the fact that they were supporting something local and homemade. And just like that, what started as a fun gardening hobby had turned into a small but successful business. It wasn't easy, though. There were still challenges. Growing enough tomatoes to meet demand, managing the harvest, and figuring out logistics. As the weeks went by, my little tomato-selling business began to evolve in ways I hadn't anticipated. What had started as a single plant had grown into a full-fledged operation. I started to plan out each growing season more carefully, thinking about which types sold the best, which varieties grew best in my backyard. My knowledge of gardening had expanded. I had moved beyond the basics into more advanced practices like companion planting. I learned how planting basil alongside tomatoes could improve flavor. I started experimenting with different soil types and fertilizers, learning which ones made the tomatoes taste better and grow faster. As the demand increased, I realized I couldn't rely on just my backyard space forever. I began thinking about how I could diversify my offerings. Could I grow other vegetables? Maybe herbs or even flowers to attract more customers? I didn't want to just be known for tomatoes. I also began exploring ways to improve my marketing and reach more people. Social media became a powerful tool for me. I started posting pictures of my tomatoes and even created a small website where people could place orders online. Word of mouth was powerful, but with online ordering and delivery, I could reach more customers who weren't able to come by in person. People from different neighborhoods started to place orders, and I started to feel like my little tomato business was gaining real traction. The future was where I really got excited. I wanted to host workshops for people interested in gardening. I wanted to share what I had learned, how small actions in your own backyard could make a real difference in the world. I also started to think about the possibility of turning my small operation into a full-fledged farm, where I could establish partnerships with nearby restaurants. Restaurants that valued fresh, local ingredients were excited to work with small producers like me. Looking back, I could never have predicted how much one small tomato plant would change my life. From a seed of curiosity, it had grown into something bigger than I ever imagined. But now, as I stand on the edge of something new, I can't help but think, if I started with just one tomato plant, who knows where the next step might take me? The possibilities seem endless, and while I don't have all the answers, I know one thing for sure. I'm excited for whatever comes next. The journey is just beginning, and the best part is, I'm still learning and growing every step of the way.